Shalom and welcome to Wisdom and Torah. I'm doing a podcast, and as you know, I'm trying to welcome different types of people who have great things to say. Biblical understanding of covenants with Professor Mark Chavalas, literary genres with Dinah Dye. She is here with me today, and she invited a good friend of ours, Matt Napier, who is very, very much someone very educated in a particular topic that we're going to present to you. When we read the Bible, sometimes and this happened to me a few years back, obviously studying intricacies, I realized how much of the context of the Bible I did not know. And I began to start formulating arguments as to the how does this work? And then I found there are different methods in which the writer convey the message. And I think we are devoid of that understanding. And the purpose of these podcasts with Dina Dai and now with Matt here with me today is to make you aware that the scriptures was not written in a vacuum, that it didn't have any meaning. Even the way the context of the words, the way they were written was sending a message. And that's really what we're trying to understand with these types of studies and the whole series that we're doing. So I want to thank Dina. Dina, how are you? Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing
Thank
today?
you. I am doing very well. Thank you. Great to
I'm
be here.
glad. I'm glad we continue to do this series. I think people are really gravitated to it now. They're understanding that we're not trying
Mhm.
to minimize the Bible. We're trying to make us understand better the whole narrative that's going on, but we are removed from its original environment. And sometimes it's a little difficult to grasp it when we live in the Western world. We're not used to these things. So for
Well,
that, go
yeah,
ahead.
I've had some good feedback. I think, that's why we started with narrative because that's at least easy to engage. And today we're going to be talking about poetry and wisdom literature. And we brought in our good friend, Matt Napper. And he did his dissertation on Micah. So I'm like, who better to bring
Yeah.
in
He told me
with
about that when we
seven
were,
chapters of poetry that
yeah.
would help
When I
us
went to
out?
see him, he was telling me all about it. I was really, wow, that's really cool. So I'm glad that we were able to bring him in and,
Yeah.
explain a little bit. Matt, how are you, buddy?
Hey, good afternoon. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, and
Thanks for
especially
making the time, man.
talking about this topic for sure.
Absolutely. Allow me just a few. I want to read this here, at least to give a quick intro. It's more for me than anybody else. I want to be aware of what's going on. I want you also to know what's going on. So, according to the Lexham Bible Dictionary, they're talking about biblical poetry, right? It says a form of competition comprising of one third, at least one third of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, is Hebrew poetry. That'll be uh, that'll be surprising to many.
Yeah.
Found predominantly in wisdom literature and the prophets, but also within narrative texts such as Exodus,
Mhm.
Deuteronomy, characterized by parallelism rather than by the rhyme. So the introduction, many modern English translations of the Bible present poetry in a distinct form that differs from the prose text. The oldest Hebrew manuscripts, however, did not set apart all poetic texts. How Hebrew poetry can be identified by various features, including, and you will describe all these, but I want to read it for the audience: parallelism, meter, and then acrostic form. A poem often requires greater interpretation than than other forms of writing. In the Old Testament, poems can function as hymns of praise or lament, like Psalms 100, 137, and victory songs like Exodus 15, Judges 5, or dire messages of destruction, like in the book of Nahum. With that being said, I'm going to let you now take over from here and teach us about the importance of understanding, biblical poetry.
So where I wanted to start with, I think people would ask, well, why is there so much poetry in the Bible, right? So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts about it when you're doing your dissertation. But it seems to me in an oral world where you're passing down stories, etc., it would be a lot easier to remember poetry than it is sort of the narrative, because it has, we talked about rhyme, meter, it's sort of it's like a song. And
A
so,
cadence, a cadence,
yeah,
like the way they chant
exactly.
the
That's
Hebrew.
all part of it. I think that that really helps us remember what's being said. So I think it's sort of the quick version. I don't have to go through the whole story. I can encapsulate it maybe in a few words. What do you think, Matt?
Um, I'm sorry. What do I think about what?
Well, just the fact that, it's an easy way to
Oh,
embrace.
yes, yeah. So when we look at the New Testament, for example, the number one quoted book out of the Old Testament is Psalms.
Yeah.
Next to that is Isaiah, and that only is about three-fourths of the amount of references to it. And so I often tell people, poetry is really like song is just a poem added to music. And so when people were trying to learn in an illiterate world, the scriptures, how would they best learn them? Through song. It's the same thing we do today. I mean, when
Yeah.
we want to teach people how to start learning their ABCs, we sing them a song. And so it's poetry. We tell them poetry. And that is how we learn best, I think.
You
And
know,
to that point, poetry in most cultures and societies, not just the biblical world, but outside of it, poetry is formulated as a formal form of writing long before narrative or prose.
oh, I did not
Okay.
know that. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. I know
Mhm.
Well, that makes sense.
I know ancient Near Eastern, wisdom literature. They use a lot of poetry too. Something that I noticed, and to be honest with you, I caught on to it more this year than any other year. We do the last day of unleavened bread. It's a special Shabbat, and we were doing the reading on Exodus 15. And the young lady who reads Hebrew from the text, from the from the Torah scroll, she began to chant it, and there was a cadence to it. In a certain amount of verses, it changes the tone as she is reading it. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I never really heard it being chanted, but I recognized and I knew that each change of a cadence or the meter maybe had a meaning, but I don't know the meaning. You see what I'm saying? But it was
Yeah.
quite interesting because I would have never really noticed until I saw it during the high holidays. It's kind of cool.
Well, yeah, and you really we talked earlier, you really see it in the poetry in the sound in Hebrew. Like and many of us are not, maybe don't know Hebrew that well, but a speaker would hear it. They'd hear the singing, they'd hear the rhythm, they'd hear, the sort of highs and the low points. And it's unfortunate we don't hear it in English.
Let me ask you guys a question. Would the liturgy, like for example, every feast has a different theme. So the liturgy will have a different maybe meter or cadence to it when they're maybe doing some other prayers. I'm only asking. I'm not sure. I'm assuming it would be.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
bet.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think about like Psalm 113 to 118, right?
Yeah,
Which, of course,
a
is
little
the
so.
most
Yeah.
quoted in the New Testament. But it was, very obviously the center of the festivals. And so I'm not sure how it was sung, but I'm pretty sure they remembered it pretty, well because it was in a poetry form.
It would not surprise me that they had their own different type of. You only sing it during the three main holidays, so they had a distinct sound that everyone knew. The moment you start singing it, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
quite
Yeah,
interesting.
Well, and can you share that about Amos, Matt? What
yeah. So Amos and Lamentations too. I mean, Lamentations, I'd have to go
Yeah.
back and look at both of these references. I mean, these are from years ago, and what really got me excited about reading the Bible from a literary perspective was a class on Amos that I took, and my professor asked me or asked us, how do we view the Bible? And at that point, I was starting to open my eyes of not dissecting the Bible like it's a science project, but reading it for the beauty it is. And he poured into me after that because that was his passion. But in that class on Amos, there's a space in Amos. I don't think it's chapter 5. That's where I wanted to go, but I can't remember where the meter changes. And what you see is it goes from 1 meter to another meter that's very noticeable as a funerary dirge. And so, as the prophet is talking about Israel going into exile, and exile is death, then when they actually heard this, they would know they would be brought into the presence of a funeral. It's as if you're walking to the funeral itself. And Lamentations
That's
does this
cool.
in a very unique way. I'm going to mess this up because I wasn't prepared to speak on this, but Lamentations has 5 chapters. And there's a way that the meter in a dirge it'll be like, I'm gonna really mess this up, but it would be like da 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 da
Okay.
da da da. It's gonna go down, the dirge goes down, but then even the whole structure of Lamentations is one big dirge where it goes like that and goes off at the end in chapter 5. So you
Yeah, and you
beautiful
never see that
artistry.
in English.
No, not at all.
So,
Oh,
so by the way they're reading the text, you know what they're reading and you know the tone of what they're reading.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's big because you know the tone that you use. Like you can just say something in
Yeah,
monotone
yeah.
and it has no effect. But, if you're talking to your kids and your voice is raising and you know what I mean? So how it's said matters. And we don't see, we read the Bible, we don't hear it.
Well, I'm thinking about the two songs of Moses, Exodus 15 and Deuteronomy 32. But then the book of Revelation, chapter 7, talks about a song, and it's actually a song of Moses. So it's interesting that if we're going to be in great tribulation, and there's going to be the song has to have a cadence to it or a meter. So I find this fascinating because now how would you know that's the song unless you don't recognize the sound? I don't know if that makes sense. You're just making me think as you're saying this. Because I
Yeah.
never thought
Well,
about the meter, and I know that's not the topic, but it just blew me away when you guys mentioned that. I'm going like, wait a minute,
it's
that will make
central to
sense now.
poetry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It just is.
I
Yeah.
was I was trying to. I'm not going to be able to find it, and it'd be conducive here. But John Selhamer, I don't know if you've ever heard of
Yeah.
him. He does some
Yeah.
great work. John Selhamer actually pulls. Oh, it just blew my mind when he lines up. We can look at the 10 generations that are through the Torah
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
strategically placed, but actually he goes through and places these sections of poetry, and they're very intentional. Like when I first read through the scriptures and I say, oh, we have this story and a story and a story and a story, and here's a random poem, and it makes sense in the text, like Exodus
Yeah.
15, it comes right after
Yeah.
the Red Sea crossing, and you think, oh, okay, well, this is their celebration. But literarily, it's actually summing up a portion of scripture. And so you can block off these sections of narrative from poem to poem. And
Yeah.
so it's as if it's giving what the point was at the beginning of this. It's as if it's giving the easy way to remember everything that was in the previous section.
Yes.
So here's all of the
Exactly.
Exodus story to the Red Sea. Here's a song so the people can remember what just happened in the last 14 chapters.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think
Very
it
amazing.
it slows us down too. Like we got to stop. Whoa, okay, we've switched gears here, and that gives us time to kind of regroup, process maybe what we heard, and then go through. Yeah, I really think a lot of this, in order for them to remember, memorizing a poem. I will confess, having been a DJ for many years and knowing
Wow.
practically every song from the 70s. And they come on the radio now, and I still remember every word. And my children go, "Oh, mom, it doesn't go away.
That
It's
happens to
planted
me
deep."
when I go to California. That I go to Cyrus Radio, whatever it is, whatever they call it.
Serious?
Yeah, they have the 80s music. And it reminded me of that decade. For me, it was amazing. I had the best time in high school. It was just a joyful decade for me. And when I hear the music, I know all the songs, I know the year they came out, and it changes my whole state of being
Yes.
there. Imagine more so the word of God. It gives you a
Yes.
narrative story, a poem, and even sings it back to you so you don't forget it. That's quite
Yeah.
interesting.
No,
So
it's
I'm wrapping up a semester I'm teaching Old Testament literature this semester, and this is always
Tell
a tough.
what you tell us what you teach. Tell them who you are, what you do, what your accomplishments are. Because we're very proud of you, by the way.
we
You're very
already know.
accomplished, and I'm very proud of you.
So my name is Matt
Congrats.
Napper. Yeah, so I'll say my largest accomplishment is that I recognize the largest blessing in my life that God gave me was my wife, Melissa. That's
Yeah.
the greatest accomplishment. But we're talking about education, so I ended up getting a master's in biblical studies and then a PhD in the Old Testament. And
Cool.
so I currently work at Louisiana Delta Community College. I work on the admin side, but I teach adjunct. And so I teach Old Testament, New Testament literature. And so this semester I taught Old Testament literature. Well, this section here, wisdom literature and the Psalms are really poetry is really hard for people to grasp. And
Yeah.
you brought up being a DJ. And so I gave a lecture one time where I was talking about this and how these things would not only be the ways that they could remember things. We have to pay attention in scripture where certain poems or certain references are being made, and immediately they would think of not just that reference, but they would think of the entire psalm. And so whenever I was going into it, I was talking about what's the most powerful one I could think of, and it was Yeshua on the cross. And he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And we all have these teachings we've heard over the years of how that was the humanity of Jesus, and how, he was reaching out and all of these things. That's not what he's doing. That's the first line of Psalm
Right.
22, which is one of the most messianic songs out there.
Right.
And so whenever he says that, everyone that's standing there, that they all knew exactly what he was referencing. They would think of the whole song. And so I went through this uh, practice with them before I went into this, where I said, tell me what comes next, and I would say, don't stop believing.
Yeah.
And I go through all of these songs. I think well, we won't go there. I used one rap song that everybody knew, but and so that's how it also works, both for the
Yes.
people who heard the stories and action, and for the people who are reading them later. We should
I
not
think
just
that's
think of one verse. That's one of my, I will not use a reference Bible, because it trains people to go back and look at this one verse. Oh, okay, this is what this one verse is being referenced. No, it wants you to know the entire
right.
chapter, the entire story,
Well,
You know
that's
that's
like what we were
go ahead. I'm
saying
sorry, Gina.
earlier about the Halim. So, we see Yeshua quoting just a phrase or two from Psalm 118, but the
Mhm.
point was the entire Psalm plus Psalm 136.
The whole
And
set.
here we are in Passover, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really great point.
Do you think that we probably would understand more of the message of the Bible if we were actually actively studying in this particular way? Because I mean, the New
Yes.
Testament for me has been have changed because I have this book by Ani, and I know you know who he is if you do first century, literary genres and stuff. And I'm blown away by how smart Paul was writing his stuff.
Mhm.
He utilized in the narrative some amazing, ways that any Greco-Roman person would have understood what he meant. Man, I'm thinking that the ancient Near East, they had a lot of wisdom literature, but we're not aware of it. Nor I think we care in the whole, study of our Bible. We're so focused about theology, we're missing the message behind the narrative, I think.
Oh, for sure. Well, so that's kind of a segue here because maybe we can talk about the sort of nuts and bolts in poetry. And we thought we'd just focus in on a few, but I think the number one that and people might recognize is Hebrew parallelism. And so we'll talk about that and give everybody some examples. But typically it's two lines that either repeat the same thought or are completely opposite, or perhaps three lines. But there is I would suggest most of the poetry is designed that way.
Yeah.
What did you find in Micah? Was that the case?
Yeah, it's mostly the case. I think there's a vital, if I could just give like a vital thing that we have to understand about poetry
Sure.
before even digging into this, is that first and foremost, before anything about poetry, before we even try to start understanding it, we have to understand that it's a language of images. And
Right.
what I mean
Yeah.
by that is, like, poetry uses words and names of concrete things or actions. So running or sleeping would be a physical action, or we could say a tree planted by streams of water. We can see that physical thing in our life. And it's basically anything that we can visualize. And we often will think of, like, if I say images, we'll think of a portrait, a picture, but it's not even that. It's a picture that you can hear, touch, and feel. It's it's this idea of being able to see something in your mind and know what the intended message is that doesn't have to do with that image mostly. And so, like, I'll ask y'all, if I ask, I'm gonna say these five words: mercy, forgiveness, goodness, evil, and worship. Could we say that the Psalms are about those things? Those are
Yes.
like five general things that I think of with the Psalms. But then if I
Yeah.
say honey, thunder, broken arms, grass, and bread, and I say, is that what the Psalms are about? And most people would say no, but that's the exact language that the poets are using.
Using. Yeah.
And this is like indirection. And so what the poet wants you to do is to experience the images as vividly as possible. And I have this, what's the purpose of poetry is what I get all the time. Why poetry? And I sum it up very succinctly by saying it expresses the inexpressible. Like you can't put, think of the metaphors of adultery. You can't put into words the emotions of torment that someone
Yeah.
feels in the betrayal of adultery, but the poet tries to do that. We try to, in the post-enlightenment world, we try to dissect the Bible. We don't try to experience it. So I think that has to be understood that what you're dealing with is a tapestry of images, and then how do we properly interpret those? I didn't mean to cut you off
No,
on
that's
that.
fine.
No,
I got a
that was
question in regards
that.
to the New Testament literary genres. Have you found a lot of the poetry? Because like you just made a comment about we study the verse. Uh, like
Mhm.
I got in trouble because every time I study the reference, I have to go to the chapter, previous chapter,
Yeah,
chapter
yeah.
after, and then I got stuck because I'm thinking I got to read the whole book now because I don't really can't grasp everything. But do you find that the writers of the New Testament were doing the same thing? Obviously, everyone knew what they were talking about, so they're really alluding to a message they probably knew.
That's exactly right. The writers, most of the writers of the New Testament, even the Old Testament. So Old Testament writers, like prophets, are assuming that the hearer or the reader knows the story of the Exodus mostly,
Uh-huh.
or that they know sometimes the story of creation. I mean, mostly they're assuming you fully understand what happened to the fathers in the Exodus. The New Testament is assuming that you know your Old Testament well, at least the Psalms, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and a few other narratives. They're making that assumption. So when we try to just cross-reference one verse, we're not truly getting the full message.
Do
Yeah,
you
I
think?
want to
Go
your
ahead.
point though about when I teach ancient Near East, one of the things I always tell people is this doesn't deter you from going and reading the Psalms as an expression of the human heart. I mean, they're not informational. They're speaking to emotions that are very deep, and that plain language just doesn't cut it. And so I encourage them, read the Psalms and glean from it. There's an underlying message, but it's also for, you can pour your heart out and, come to tears when you're reading if you're going through something specific. So I'm glad you brought that up because it's really key. You don't get that from narrative.
No, no, not at
Sorry,
all.
Rico.
No, no, that's fine. I'm really intrigued by this. Um, these are areas that I don't necessarily focused in. So, and I only really got more interested because of my experience on that last day of unleavened bread, which I heard something I read every year we read Exodus 15, but I've never heard it read with a proper meter and the way. So as I'm listening, somebody next to me says, "How come they're changing the way of reading it?" I said, "Because that section means something." Now I don't know what it meant, but the way that they were reading it, the tone changes. I saw like a little marching, one. The other one was a little bit more, and the other one was like, epic. It was fascinating. I'm thinking that's a whole class in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think poetry is designed to really stretch the language, to kind of stretch it
Oh,
out
totally.
to,
Yeah.
because words, we just sort of keep them in these little boxes and, we've got them well defined. But this is a way to kind of move beyond that.
So John Piper, and I'm not a fan of John Piper necessarily, but I loved what he said. Language has its limits, but he said that for the poet, the limitation of language doesn't produce silence, it produces poetry. And
Ah,
so that's to what you're saying is
yeah.
this stretching of
Yes.
language beyond its limits. That's exactly what it is. And if we don't learn to experience the Bible that
Yes.
way, we can't fully understand it.
So
Well,
now
and
we
again,
have
the Bible is meant to be experienced.
Mhm.
It's not
right.
just as these words on a page that are flat. I checked my box. I read 6 chapters today. I'm good to go. And I don't even remember what I read. We're supposed to engage and be in the story and experience it.
So this does actually make a point in which people say in Israel that you will gather more information from the text if you learn the language.
Mm.
because
Oh,
then
absolutely.
even the
Yeah.
way it's reading it, I'm not saying we got to become Hebrew experts. What I'm trying to tell you is that we are only reading a layer. We have the historical, we have all that stuff. So we are really reading, and we're not really getting the feeling and the life of that text.
Yeah.
Because when you mention about Micah going into a funerary tone, now when I read it now, I'm going like, oh, something's happening here. It's not just words now. And I never really thought about it. Sometimes we think, oh, that's just a tradition, the way they read it, and when in fact, it's no, the message is supposed to bring a feeling of sadness or enthronement for God or praise for the Lord, rejoicing for Him, and we've missed that. So now I understand why the Psalms function in such a broad perspective, and that's quite interesting. Now I got something to look into. I'm
There's a
intrigued. You got
there's a
me.
there's a new cartoon movie that came out recently called King of Kings. I don't know if y'all saw that.
Yeah.
Same
Yeah.
people that produced The Chosen, so I took my kids to see it, and I fell in love with it because I had no idea what it was. I just saw it was put on by those people. My kids, you can hardly take kids to a movie these days.
Right.
So I took them, and so the story is about Charles Dickens, who wrote the story of the Bible for his kids. And his younger kid, Walter, in the story wants him to tell a story of a king. And so he decides, Charles Dickens tells him the story of Yeshua. And but as the movie progresses, Walter finds himself, as you're watching the visualization of the story of Yeshua as told by Charles Dickens, now Walter is part of the imagery. And by the
Mm.
end of the movie, both Walter and Charles are fully engaged in the story of Yeshua there being told. And I loved it because that's exactly what we're supposed to do, you know. We're
Yeah.
supposed to put ourselves in the midst of, feel it, smell it,
Yeah. Yeah.
hear it.
Yeah. It
How
So
much
engages all the senses, almost all the senses. Yeah.
how much of this, if any, have you found in the New Testament writings?
my focus was Old Testament, obviously. But I find it throughout. I mean, when we look at things like I'm trying to remember the chapter, Paul in First Corinthians um, weaves in a very subtle reference to the Shema. Maybe First Corinthians 8, maybe weaves in a reference to that. And of course, the book of Revelation, John is uh, all poetry. I mean, and that's a whole different genre that if y'all
Right.
ever put me back when it comes to visionary genre and symbolic reality in the Bible, like I love that genre as well. But that's all poetry as well. And so it's throughout. I mean, you have a whole separate set of genres there. Gospels are a genre to themselves that are unparalleled in the rest of the world. And even epistles, learning for some epistles, we think, well, you've heard it so many times. Well, this is just you're reading someone's mail. That's not how it was. Paul wrote the letter of Romans. He didn't put it in a mailbox and someone opened it up and read it and said, nice letter, thanks, Paul. He sent somebody with it who gave it as a sermon. This was read communally. Most people had to have letters read to them because they were illiterate anyway. And so there's a whole different aspect to letters. It's not like a personal email from one person to the next when we understand the epistle. So
So that meant that every letter was addressed to the community, not the individual.
there are a few to individuals like Paul to Timothy, maybe, but
Philemon.
by and large, your epistles are all communal letters.
Right.
You
Well,
just didn't have the resources to write personal letters back then.
Yeah.
I find in the New Testament, maybe not large blocks of poetry per se, but certainly liturgical references kind of woven in. There might only be a couple of sentences. And then
Oh,
I might consider even parts of the Sermon on the Mount to be structured in that way.
Sermon on the Mount's wisdom literature and
And
definitely there. And so that's to one of my point, like I often get these questions from students or from people in the church, like, why should I care about poetry? Like, well, we already mentioned it's one third of the Bible, and some people say it's like so difficult. And so, like Nahum 1:7 says, "The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in Him." That's not a difficult passage, and it uses metaphor. It uses some very direct language. But then we have this idea that it's not for normal people, like normal people don't use poetry or whatever, or that it's optional. And so I love Leland Ryken, one of the best scholars on literary genres, he says that prose is everyday discourse on its best behavior. And so we use poetry throughout, but I'm getting to the point of the New Testament. It's not always these great big psalms.
Right.
Like, I am the light of the world.
Yeah.
That's poetic.
Yeah.
You are the salt of the earth.
That's classic
That is
metaphor.
that is classic poetry, classic metaphor. And here's the one that I really love, Ephesians 2, and everybody reads Ephesians 2, 8, and 9. We know that that's the most quoted, and they don't go to verse 10. But verse 10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works." That word workmanship, I never even noticed this till way late in my education. My mentor asked me if I knew this when he knew that I was into poetry. The word is poema in Greek. It's the word
What verse are you reading?
Ephesians 2:10. Ephesians
Ephesians
2:10.
2:10.
For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. Workmanship there is poema. It's a form of the word poem. We're his, we're what he created, what he couldn't vocalize, what he wanted to create. I mean, and I always go back with that verse back to creation where we see the poetics and narrative there, and I'm getting way off track. We're supposed to be talking about parallelism, but you know, Adam, the first man, is created, and God says it's not good that you would be alone. And then he parades a bunch of animals in front of him, and there's some poetics in the language between 2:7 and 2:19. But he names all the animals. But then what happens when woman's actually created from his side? He doesn't name her. She doesn't get a
Right.
name. I mean, she somewhat gets a name, but it's poetry. He speaks poetry to her. And here, Paul is recognizing the same thing and says that we are all his poetry. We're all
Well,
his poema.
give me that verse again. I can't find it.
Ephesians 2:10.
2:10. For we are his creation, created in Messiah
His
Yeshua.
creation. The word there for we are his creation. Mine says
Oh,
workmanship. That word creation, poema. We're
yeah.
poetry.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
No, I would have
I would
never.
add 1 Corinthians 13, our love chapter.
Oh
That
man.
is, yeah. I mean,
So
we
poetic.
it's
So
so
poetic.
poetic. Like you can't just sit there and take it literally and stuff it in a narrative box. And
That's
it's
right.
appealing to all, this love emotion.
Hmm.
And I was thinking too, in First Corinthians, this section, we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an
Hmm.
eye, at the last shofar. Just a beautiful expression of poetry there, not meant to take it, literally and put it in a box. Yeah.
Yep.
So I think again, it's maybe not large blocks of poetry in the New Testament, but definitely there.
Oh yeah, it's definitely all over.
So let's just, because, before we run out of time here,
Yeah,
but
we'll look at parallelism.
yeah, that's like my favorite. So
Yeah.
we've been talking about the Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32, we call it the Ha'azinu. But just the first few verses. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak. Let the earth hear the words of my mouth. So there you have two verses, basically repeating one another using different words, suggesting the same thing. May my teaching trickle like rain, my speech distill like dew, like gentle rain on new grass, like showers on tender plants. I mean, all the S's in there, and it sounds like water and rain rushing over grass and stuff,
Mhm.
even just reading it. And even in the Hebrew, you would probably, pick up that sort of swooshing water sound of teaching, trickling down. So again, for I will proclaim Adonai's name, ascribe greatness to our God. So again, repeating two themes, repeating back to back. So I know you must have a million in Micah. Now, sometimes in Hebrew parallelism, they're opposite. So like the
So yeah,
righteous,
there's three kinds actually. So you have ones that are the same, and I would express this, people think of our poetry. What I don't want people to think is in the Hebrew, it would sound like ours.
right?
Like in our poetry in English, we want to rhyme at the end or rhyme every other. There's
Yeah,
no rhyming that happens in Hebrew.
no rhyme or reason.
Yeah, no rhyme or reason. But what the biblical poets want to do is rhyme with images. They want to rhyme the ideas. And so you have three forms of parallelism. So, and really there's a questionable fourth form, but you have the ones that are the same, ones that are opposite.
Yeah.
Then you have ones that are a continuation. So it'll be a continuation of thought. And then there's a whole different one. I can't remember what it is. It's kind of contested,
I
but
think
um,
this one seems to
but
be a continuation because in the previous chapters in Deuteronomy, God says, I call heaven and earth as a witness against you for a covenantal relationship. And it's quite interesting that the scholars all agree that the opening of Deuteronomy 32 is actually in the format of a covenant lawsuit.
Covenant. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I find it quite interesting that he's
Blessings and
doing it in a
cursings.
poetic, huh?
Blessings and cursings in that
Yeah.
chapter, and then like an opening preamble with a teaching.
so
Hear the words of my mouth and the teaching trickling like rain.
So why are so many people arguing about the Bible when we don't even know how the Bible's written?
I know.
oh, well,
It's,
here's one of the things that just came up recently. You know, Jacob, his name's changed to Israel, came up recently in our local community. And so you get the question, like in some of the Psalms or in the prophets, it'll interchange Jacob and Israel. And we look for this great deep meaning. Well, there's not one necessarily. I mean, it's just biblical parallelism. It's
yeah.
synonymous parallelism where
Yes.
it's just saying the same thing different ways. I wanted to give some examples. Antithetical parallelism. That's where things are opposite. So like
Okay.
Proverbs 13:9, the light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked will be put out.
Mm.
Yeah.
So those are the opposite ones. So you see actually that form in a lot of wisdom literature because
Yes.
wisdom literature's there's 2 points in wisdom literature. This is jumping ahead. But one is to compare, do this, but don't do that. And the other one is kind of like speculative. It wants you to sit back and think what would happen or what is this saying. But that's antithetical. Now, synthetic is where it's like this growing, expanding. So, like Psalm 104:27, these all look to you to give them their food in due season. So, those aren't the same things, but it's joined together. Why are they looking to you? So that you will give them their due food in its season. And the one that was, I had to look it up again, the one that was kind of questionable was this climactic parallelism, where it builds up, but
Sure.
really it's just synonymous. But Psalm 96:7, ascribe to the Lord, O families of the people, ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. You kind of see this kind of crescendo, but really that's kind of that one's kind of synthetic. It's going
So
forward.
Psalm 150 will be written in what format? I know it's a poem.
Which one? Psalm what?
The last
Uh,
one,
Oh, Psalm 150.
concluding
no, I'm
song.
sorry. I'm sorry. That's not
Is
the
that
one.
what you?
136. I think you already mentioned it.
Oh, the Great
Oh,
Hallel.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's classic from creation to Exodus
right.
creation. I mean that is, and
How
all
much
in a
how much of
poetry.
this do we see in the book of
oh,
Revelation? Because in my study in the book of Revelation, I'm finding that there's so many different types of literary genres. It's kind of crazy.
yeah,
Metaphors.
and you've got a lot of sub genres. Like 136 is very unique, where um, that's Hebrew parallelism, but it's using this repetition of his faithful love endures forever.
Right.
It's parallel to everything. It's actually this beautiful give thanks to the Lord for he is good. The he is good is parallel to his faithful love endures a lot.
Yep.
It's answering how is his faithful love enduring forever because he's good, because he's God of gods, he's Lord of lords, he does great wonders. So that's parallelism through the entire psalm there, but it's using the second line as the same. And so it's actually this great big parallel psalm where all of those things are kind of equal to each other, and they're all declaring his what his faithful love endures forever looks like.
And it's the great punctuation point on the Halim.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this last time we were talking, when in Matthew 26:30, when they go out, they sing hymns and go out to the Mount of Olives. I think the hymn that they were punctuating there was Psalm 136 because of what was about to happen. And this psalm that goes through creation and keeps repeating and then talks about the Exodus and the defeat of enemies. And here we are coming up. Yeshua is going to be arrested by these very same types. And eventually, he will be crucified and buried, etc. So I don't know if that's the case, but I think everything he's doing is kind of like a poem, right? And trying to and directing us back. Maybe he only gives us a verse, but he's wanting us to know the whole story.
And what
So
the
how do
yeah.
we okay,
Oh,
so how do we go about conveying this message to the audience that neither really they don't many people, and this is people don't like to hear, but it's true. In our ranks, the level of education of understanding the Bible and the commandment is practically maybe 2%. And if we're not reading the commandments and understanding the narrative, and we don't know the genres, no wonder we're so messed up. We're not really understanding the message behind the message.
I
and
think some of this is the fruit of sort of evangelical Christianity that has that has not opened the doors for their congregants to even appreciate this or understand this. I think it's a more cultural thing than anything
Yeah,
else.
I hear.
And I don't know how you break through, but I mean, at least we're trying here to open people's eyes to see the value in it and to
Do you
appreciate it, maybe
do you
take.
think do you think that within the people that follow Torah, they're not really understanding this either because we're still behaving in somewhat as Christian people would, not understanding certain things because we're removed from the environment. I mean, a Jewish person who reads the Hebrew, they will be able to see it faster than we would, obviously. Whether they care is a different story. But I mean, because even though I heard the cadence change in the story of the meter in the story of Exodus 15, it's not like I sat down and said, okay, let me study that out for the next 3 hours. I mean, where
But
did
it
the
did
cadence change?
something to where you don't have to study for 3 hours. It hit a nerve in a second,
True.
and it planted something deep in your heart, and you can't even explain it or express it. It's just there. And I think that's what poetry is supposed to do. And so until people begin to experience it, they might not have an appreciation of it.
Actually, when I heard it, my instinct was something is happening, something is being told. I'm not understanding the verses because the person was going so fast. But
mhm.
if I follow in English, then I'll be able to follow suit in what the story is trying to tell me when the tone change. I think the whole storyline would change dramatically if we understand the high points and the low point or the low point points of Exodus 15. And that's just my opinion. I don't know.
So I think socially is there's a problem too because we want to know the answers right now.
True.
And poetry especially, but really the entire Bible requires us to slow down. And
Mhm.
we don't want to slow down. And when I read commentaries where you're going through Psalms and you read a commentary, or it's really not in like scholarly commentaries because they're taking the time, but like in the footnote commentaries and study Bibles, they'll say, well, this psalm means this. Well, you just took away the intended experience. The goal of the poet, the poetry and the poet, the goal is not to give you the answer. The goal is for you to discover the answer. So even for modern Orthodox Jewish communities who know Hebrew very well and know the scriptures very well, it still can be a challenge. And so as we go, like if we look at like metaphors, and a metaphor is an implied assertion of correspondence. It's wanting you to know that A is not the same as B, but a point is being made about the two. And so A is the literal image and B is the actual subject. We can't confuse those as, we always get in trouble when we approach a metaphor and make it something concrete in our lives.
Right.
So I'll just give you one of the most famous Psalms, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Yeah.
So even for modern Jewish cultures who predominantly live in urban societies, they still have to sit and meditate on what does it mean to call the Lord a shepherd?
Right.
And like we know that, oh, okay, a shepherd leads sheep. No, 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 no. We should not underscore that to that point. I mean, what's being communicated in just that small phrase is that these sheep depend for the shepherd on their entire life, their ability to be able to graze and drink. And They're totally dependent on the shepherd for their protection. I mean, all of those things are wrapped up in this one thing. And so if we haven't been in an agrarian society, then it's hard for us to see and feel that image. So, that's just an example of
Every it
how
also
that.
reveals the character of God doing the role of taking care of somebody. Yeah, you just kind of said it. If we don't live in that society, sometimes it's difficult. In my trip on my trip to Turkey and Greece, and I was able to really grasp a better understanding of the letters of Paul because I was there. I got a chance to see certain things. And now when I read it, I'm going, oh, he's trying to connect something historical with the story of the congregation there. And it's very humbling, guys, when you think you have a grasp on a biblical narrative, and then you go to a place and you look and you go like, wait a minute, let me go back. I think I messed it up back there. And I think if we're never exposing people to these types of studies or research, obviously there is plenty of research. I'm reading a lot of the articles right here as you're talking. We're just not aware of it. And I think the Bible will become more of an experience if we learn to digest and appreciate a lot of these things. I'm still learning, and I got to go back now and consider all this because I'm very intrigued by it. I wonder if Leviticus has the same tone, same things.
Well,
Um,
the ancient Near East world is designed to experience and storytell, experience through storytelling. And we live in a world where it's information.
Well, that's true.
So that alone puts kind of a roadblock. So if we can kind of go back and sort of understand how we're supposed to approach this, and it's not like when you go through something and you're in an experiential mode, you don't come to the end of it and you've got it all worked out and it's all nicely wrapped up. End of narrative. Let me move on to the next. You are on experience journey, and maybe if we can appreciate more the journey and what it takes instead of obsessed with the final destination per se, maybe that'll help. I don't know.
Well, living in a society that is everything. So, I mean, right now, my problem is I have way too many resources and the technology to expedite my learning that would otherwise take me a week. I could do it in 2 days with copies and highlights and cross references and resources. I mean, my Lord. I mean, they're so fast that sometimes you get lost in the information and we're not really appreciating the message behind the
Exactly.
message.
I
And the,
think we're on information overload and
yeah.
we've sort of lost the appreciation of the story.
But can you imagine if we learn to identify the what we were talking about earlier, the parallelism, the metaphors, and then the meter within the story? I mean, we can literally hear it's like music telling us the tone. I wonder if Deuteronomy 32, when God is bringing judgment, the cadence change. And by the way, there's a guy named Uri Harel. You remember that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, he passed away sadly
Yeah.
years
From
ago.
Arizona.
Right, and he was doing um, he was taking the Hebrew letters and he was
Oh,
making
the
them into
music.
music. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I
And
do
I
remember.
heard Deuteronomy 32, and it had the changes, and I could not appreciate. It. I didn't know really what it meant, but it's research on that. I wonder if I could find that on YouTube. Maybe
Yeah,
kind of
there's so many dimensions to poetry, and it's within all the genres, which is what's unique. It's not it is its own separate genre, but it fits in, narrative and prophecy and apocalyptic literature and epistle and wisdom literature, and it fits in all of them. So it's kind of a good idea to at least learn to appreciate it and maybe start small. Start with, small passages and I always I admit because this was not my topic in high school. I readily admit that I wasn't very good at it at all, and I had like the worst English teacher ever who made me not like it even more. So I've had to blow through that and try to just sit with the material and not make it be something literal and feel frustrated because I can't figure out the literal meaning.
yeah.
And we're not good at that because we are guilty in the Hebrew roots thing of trying to make everything mysterious and deep and not just appreciate what the writer was trying to do and to communicate for what it was.
That's true. Let me share something here real quick. I'm just curious. Let's see how it sounds like. This is, let me share the screen. This is from Uri Harel. Um, Curious to see what it sounds like. It's from Deuteronomy, okay?
Okay.
Deuteronomy 6:4. Shema Israel, Adonai Echad.
I can't hear anything.
You can't hear anything?
Uh-uh. I'm turned up.
Now, I think Zoom does weird when trying to share audio across Zoom through a
Can I see it?
computer.
I can see it. I just can't hear.
That's the Shema.
Okay. Whatever you
Anyway,
say.
yeah, that was he was reading the Shema, and then they put music to it. It's very epic type thing. It's kind of
Oh,
cool,
yeah.
But I'm just wondering. I mean, I'm very much perplexed, and I feel like I need so much more now.
Well,
And
that's
I
the
think
point
that's
of
great.
this.
I think
We're
it's great.
trying to encourage, there's way more out there than what you think. Matt, I wanted to go back to your Micah experience,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
because to go through 7 chapters of poetry.
Well, and let me tell you, I set myself up like Micah's really tough.
Yeah,
Micah's really tough in the poetry, and then I was doing textual work with it. I was comparing the Septuagint to the Masoretic text, which is an even a greater task. But
So wait a minute. What makes Micah difficult? Because it's all written in poetry?
well, no. It's not just as written poetry; it's very difficult poetry. Uh,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's very difficult poetry, and then you add trying to compare it to the Greek Septuagint, and I came to some conclusions there. I used to think that the people who translated the Septuagint were Hebrew and Greek scholars. They were not, at least not the ones who translated the minor prophets. They were Greek scholars and Hebrew ish scholar-ish. They weren't familiar
you're
with the land.
light.
Yeah, Hebrew light. But it's really good because the imagery there. I mean, what happens when we misuse this stuff? One of
Yeah,
and just in our theological corner of the world, one of the biggest misuses I've seen is the idea of literal marriage and divorce of God and His people throughout
right.
Scripture.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
get in trouble. It creates theological issues
Yes.
when we take metaphors and we misuse them. And so that metaphor alone, when it comes to marriage and divorce, I mean, God ends up having sister wives in Jeremiah 3 and lets one go, but then still remarries them. And there's some places in Jeremiah, for example, where the English really tones down the Hebrew. There's a place where it says that basically he lifts up the skirt of Israel, and he's referring to rape and pillage. But if we take that literally, we would have to call our sovereign creator a rapist. And that's not what's intended. What's intended was that the damage that came to them from the Assyrians who
Hmm.
conquered them, that God allowed that
Right.
because of their overwhelming sin, not that God was active in it. And so we have to take these metaphors. So one of my favorite passages is going to sound dark and gloomy. One of my favorite passages from Micah, you asked about Micah, is the beginning of chapter 3. Now, as we get to Micah chapter 3, we've already kind of built the stage. Micah is really addressing leadership in Israel and their, what do you call it, financial abuse of their neighbors. They are extorting their neighbors for money. The men are coming back from war and they've already stolen their houses from their women and all of these things. So Micah chapter 3 opens up, and you'll see here why I say it's difficult because you have 3 lines, 6 lines, 4 lines. It's not very clear. But he says, Then I said, Now listen, leaders of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, aren't you supposed to know what is just? That's actually a little bit of wisdom literature there. It's asking the reader or hearer to ponder what is just and what should they have known. And then it says, You hate good and love evil. You tear off people's skin and strip their flesh from their bones. You eat the flesh of my people after you strip their skin from them and break their bones. You chop them up like flesh for the cooking pot, like meat in a cauldron. They will cry out to the Lord, but he will not answer them. He will hide his face from them at that time because of the crimes they've committed. So, what crimes have they committed? If we read this flatly, they're cannibalists.
Right.
Right.
And he's going to punish them for the crimes of cannibalism. But what's actually happening here is he's using a metaphor, a very strong one. Imagine witnessing a group of the mayor and his people come into someone's house and start killing the people and stripping their skin off their bones and putting it in a pot, eating it and saying that was good and walking to the next house. That would be so gruesome, so horrible. We wouldn't be able to stand. I can't stand talking about it right now. It's making my stomach turn.
Yeah, yeah,
But what God is doing here through the prophet Micah, he's saying all of these white collar crimes that even today we look at as lesser than, all of these white collar crimes, when you extort your neighbor, when you steal their field, when you uh, what Yeshua turned over the tables, when you use unjust weights and measures, it's as if you have stripped the skin off their bone. That's how grievous that sin is to God. It's as if you didn't just murder someone, then you ate them. I mean, that's God's addressing what we still deal with today, where it's like, oh, well, that was just a little white collar crime. That was just a little stock market fraud.
yeah.
No, you took someone's livelihood. I mean, think of these people that rob these elderly people from their life savings on Ponzi schemes and stuff. God says it's as bad as if you not even just killed them, then you ate them. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the message that's being portrayed, and so we can't read this flatly and literally.
Right. What makes me wonder too, I mean, Yeshua's making a reference to this, to the den of robbers. Speaking of
Yes, yes,
robbers here, and he's accusing the leadership in the first century of exactly this, of
yes.
extorting their neighbor. And so in that accusation, do they sit up and think, oh, that sounds a little like Micah going on there? Do they
They
go through
should.
that? Makes me
So the
wonder.
so the main theme of the whole thing is righteousness and justice.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you know, okay, I'm just listening. I mean, it feels good because, as you know, you guys know, I know how much time you guys spend studying. As you know, how much time I spent researching. And one of the most humbling experiences for in my life, specifically the last 16 years that I've been really deep into the academic thing, is that when you think you know something, you really don't. I mean, yeah, I guess if I start going right back to the Hebrew and understanding the Hebrew, I'm reading in the Hebrew, I probably would change certain things that I believe today because it's not really the proper understanding from the text. It's my understanding from everyone else's opinions, maybe, and conclusions.
I
Um,
think you get the whole story in community.
yeah,
So we could sit here, we could take a passage, we each have seen it from a different dimension. We could come together and we might have a larger view of that passage than what we would have. But we all study individually by ourselves in our homes, separate from everything. I mean, you may have an opportunity to be in a congregation and share some of this, but I think that's a big part of the problem. Their their appreciation of the text was within a communal setting.
that's true. But the biggest thing is that we're not changing the original context of the text like many people today do. They want to change the context of the text
Sure.
to apply to the theology. What we're
Right.
doing, we're putting our experiences together from covenantal relationship, from this, whatever, whatever, and we say, okay, you come and say, this is this type of genre. Oh, wow. But this is the message from a covenant perspective. And then you goes, and I think that's healthier in
Yes.
understanding the Bible in the way it's been done within the Hebrew roots, messianics, or whatever. It's like, oh, well, I think, and it appears to me, like you said, Matt, the metaphors of marriage. Right now, people are saying, in the Spanish world, um, that the reason why Yeshua is the father is because, he divorced in Deuteronomy 24 and Jeremiah, and therefore now he has to. I mean, they created a mess just because they did not understand the metaphors.
Right.
Metaphors by definition cannot be used literally.
Yes.
By the very definition, they can't be used literally. And so Isaiah responds in a different way, where Jeremiah says, in chapter 3, like, Judah and Israel have both become harlots, basically, and I've put away Israel. Later in verse 14, he actually calls her back. He says, just come back. I'm still your husband. Like, I'm still here, even though I wrote you a certificate of divorce. But Isaiah, later on in chapter 50, and if you know the progression of Isaiah, you're well into the hope chapters of
Right.
the oracles of
Right.
hope. Isaiah says it, and he says, where's this certificate of divorce that you claim is out there? I
Yeah.
think it's verse 1. He said, where is the debtor in who I owe money and I have to buy you back? There is no
It's a little
certificate.
irony there, you think?
Yes, yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Because then later on we see in the New Testament how we've been purchased with a ransom. And
Yeah.
even Yeshua said so, and the imagery of a wedding is still being conveyed through the first century letters. So it's quite interesting. So no wonder the book of Isaiah is the most quoted book in the New Testament.
Yeah. And
Well,
Isaiah's full of poetry. That's why. Oh, parallelism. I forgot to mention earlier. Two uses for it. We try to struggle, like, why did they do things this way? And Dina kind of mentioned this earlier. One is simply for the artistic value. Poetry is going to do that. But two is for the sake of memorization. Like,
Yeah.
it helps people remember. It's the repetition of the same idea twice or three times, and so it helps you remember. So that's Isaiah's largely poetic.
So
The chapters that are referenced.
I guess they're smarter than we thought.
yeah. Yeah, we could learn a thing or two from those prophets. And
How do you guys? Let me ask you about this. I just I'm really enjoying this because it puts me in a place of not knowing anything about it. That it makes me realize how much more there is to learn, and I love that. That to me that's exciting. That I could go through one text and say, "Oh well, this means this." Are you sure? How do you guys deal with learning some of this stuff and then listening to people? Because now when I talk around you guys, I gotta be careful.
I'm not
But
sure you
listening
want
to
to know.
people speak, and especially you, Matt,
Uh,
because that's your area, only because this is a main area in this particular thing. Dina talks about some of the other things you talk about. I'm pretty sure the same thing. It's like, that's not what it means. It's got to be
Yeah.
difficult in a way.
well, it is a little, I think for me, I've learned to be a little more patient and try to meet people where they are. Because I'll, granted, I'll be talking to someone and in my mind, I'm going, oh my gosh. But I try to find sort of common ground or somewhere where we can actually talk about it. And I can be encouraging because if I react the way I really want to, it would not be very godly whatsoever.
Do you
But I
think,
do think patience with people really is, for me, it's been an important key.
well, I mean, uh, I was, I've been traveling a lot again. So I'm encountering the last 3 years, it seems like the movement have gone backwards 10 years. I don't know what happened with the virus, with COVID. To be honest, I'm completely
I think the
blown away
Hebrew
by it.
roots movement got the virus.
I'm telling you, I go around, people are extremely nice, but the arguments that I hear and the debates that I'm listening to, I'm going like, what are you guys reading? Either we are so isolated that we're reading different things that we cannot communicate with them, or maybe a little bit of both. But for some reason, I feel like such an outsider speaking with people that supposed to be my brothers and sisters. We have no common ground. They don't care about reading the Hebrew, that's too Jewish. They do Jewish. They don't care about liturgy, that's too Jewish. They don't care about the temple, that's done away with. They want, and then everything seems like Christian mindset theology trying to interpose into biblical poetry and whatever. I mean, you can't have it like that. It's difficult trying to disconnect ourselves with the way we normally think. Maybe that's why people, when they listen to you, Dina, maybe they're not grasping where you're coming from because we're not trained. And even myself, I study, but I'm not trained in some of these areas. But I'm honest about it. It's not like I'm saying, oh, yeah, I know about that. Well, no. I mean, I'm learning too, just like you guys are. And this is a great topic because it makes me realize that now when I'm reading something, I can't just say, oh, this is what it says, because there's a little bit more to it. So how do we deal with that? How do we convey the message to the audience? Because after all, they need to learn it. Just because they're not educators, or maybe they're not interested in the same story, or the same type of dedication to study like we, doesn't mean that they don't deserve the opportunity. But it comes with risk, like people thinking that all Dina talks about is metaphors, when in fact you're trying to teach them a message behind the message. It's difficult for us. Either
Yeah.
way, we lose.
I really just have found over the years, like, that I've got to find, or I just really pay attention early on as to whether or not the person or the audience really wants to understand better. But if they don't really want to understand better, I don't waste my time. That sounds harsh, but like,
That's true.
I'm not gonna waste my time. But I
I'm with
found
you.
those that truly just don't understand. I just found unique ways to get them to understand. I mean, you're talking to the person who loves biblical metaphor and prophetic poetry. I'm the guy that everybody says, okay, Matt, not everything in the Bible is metaphor. And I'm like, I know that. And so, like, that's what I run into a lot is like, oh, you're just metaphoricalizing everything. And that's not the case. I mean, you're really trying to find what's the intended message. There's a concrete message behind metaphors. And so, what I've found is that if I use modern things that people will understand, kind of like my lecture where I did, don't stop, and everybody says believing, because that helps people understand what I'm talking about. But when it comes to metaphors, in the South, we have, short little quips. They're called aphorisms. And so in the South, we have a lot. When you want to say someone's not very intelligent, you could say something like he's as sharp. There's some that are not appropriate, but sharp as a mashed potato sandwich. Like, he's not a mashed potato sandwich, but we understand the intended message. Or, if someone's lazy, they're as useless as a screen door on a submarine. Like,
Yeah.
we use these things in everyday language.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah,
Bless your heart.
yeah. I mean, when you think about, there's one that's more Texas. It's like for those people who act very prideful or haughty, he's all hat and no cattle. Like he wears the big fancy cowboy hat, but has no cattle to back it up. Like we use these things in everyday life, and we understand them when we apply them here. It's getting them to see that they were doing the same thing in the Bible.
Do you think it's because people are so holy they don't see real people writing the scriptures? They were real people. One of the biggest revelations for me when I was studying engineering is the realization that Moses was just like us. Because we look at Moses as this is the guy who saw the Lord. He was on Mount Sinai. He got to speak with the Creator. What an honor. Oh, my Lord. He was just like us. And that's so hard for us to fathom.
Our Paul's very horrible Greek grammar. Like, and that gets into inspiration. A lot of people today still think that God just like whispered his words into the people that wrote
Yep.
it.
Yep.
Well, that's why did he not correct Paul's grammar? Like, Paul has very bad grammar.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, I
I
mean,
think,
it will be understood why. Go ahead, Dina.
well, no, I think that's a really good point. We have this idea that this sort of divine spark came in and magically wrote the scriptures. But these were real people living at a real time, picking up the information around the culture and time they lived in, and they wrote it expecting us to try to appreciate their interpretation because they left a lot of stuff out and they
Yeah.
put weird things in, and they did it on purpose. And then we're going to argue over everything that they've said, whether it's divine or whether, it's just exhausting. And having written books, I sort of have a better appreciation of, stuff ends up on the cutting room floor because I don't
Yeah.
have room or time and it's not my focus.
Well,
And
just wait.
so,
Wait until you go to Asia Minor with me and you get to go to those seven churches and then go to Greece. And then you get to see everything there. You see the Bema where Paul was taken. And then you see, and you're going like, oh, I hear this guy arguing about this stuff, and he's never been there. He don't know what in the world he's talking about, and you got to listen to it as if it's. I mean, it's very frustrating because we do not make an effort sometimes, by and large, to make sure we understand the scenario, panoramic picture of everything that's going around the
Yeah.
storyline. And I
Yeah.
think
You
that's what's
can't
missing.
say everything.
I'm sorry?
Well, the writer cannot say everything.
True.
He puts in a few words and hoping that that communicates enough to you that you know, oh yeah, we're talking about Passover. Okay. He doesn't have to say anything more. And so we want it we want it to be able to say everything, and it doesn't.
Well, let me share something that may be part of the topic, but it just made an impression on me when I went to Laodicea, right? And last year I was there in Laodicea. Obviously, I was so excited to be there because it's a biblical thing and it's
Because you're a
amazing,
lukewarm kind of guy.
right? But I understood what the lukewarm now meant.
Right.
But I kept then I went into the history, and then when I read it, it says, "I know your works." I wonder what the word creation there is. Maybe it's the one that you
Oh,
talked about. No, it's something else.
no, it's different.
Yeah.
You're in
Okay.
Revelation, yeah.
Right. It says, I know your works. You're neither hot or cold. And now I know what that means. If you were hot or cold, that's because you are lukewarm, neither hot or nor cold. I will vomit you out of my mouth. There's such a thing as symposium, which is anyway, that's another conversation. But you're saying I'm rich, I have become rich, and I have need of nothing. Well, that's connected with the great earthquake they had, that they
Yeah.
rejected the emperor's money because they
Yeah.
were banking system and they were
Yeah.
basically at a crossroads of everything. And it says, and you do not know that you are wretched, a pitiable and poor, blind and naked. What? It just changed. And they keep saying, I advise you to buy from me gold refined by fire, in order that you may become rich in white and clothing, right? In order that you may be clothed, and the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed. And eye salve, I don't know how you pronounce that.
Salve.
SALV,
Saul,
eye
yeah.
salve,
Salve.
to smear
Salve.
in your eyes in order that you may see. But you read that, you go, what in the world? Where does that come from? Well, it just so happened that Laodicea, they had like the latest medical discoveries of eye salve.
Mhm.
So I would have never known the context of the letter unless I was there reading the history. I mean, that's just a historical background on that. Imagine if we get into the literary genres. So now the message is being told considering geographical location, historical events. I mean, that one verse, we have an hour of research.
Yeah.
Well, and just on my midweek service, we're going through the book of Revelation, and so just to this, one of the things that I cued in our group into initially, we always think about John writing the letters to the seven churches. He didn't do that. That's not what it says. This is a vision, and he's
Right.
watching letters being written to angels of the churches, and now your whole world is messed up
And the
because
speaker is Yeshua, by the way.
that's right. The speaker's Yeshua, and he's instructing letters to be written in a vision, not a tangible letter that's going out. So
That's
all,
quite precise. Would just be a vision. Think about it, though.
oh
Well,
yeah,
and what you just read is poetry on steroids.
oh yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's visionary language, and you read back to the Yeshua in chapter 1, the first depiction of what he looked like. It's tying in Daniel chapter 7.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And then later on, you get into chapter 4 and 5. You have
Ancient
this
of
throne
Days.
room scene, and now you're going back to Ezekiel 1 and all
Well,
of these.
chapter six. Chapter
Ezekiel
six is talking about the
34,
four. I'm sorry.
right? Ezekiel 34, you were just describing
Right.
in the same, I mean, yeah. And it's meant to spark all this because the writer isn't going to say,
Well,
now go to Ezekiel 1
right.
while I.
Well, it's like in chapter 6, talking about the four horsemen and the colors. Right. I went to do some research, and I found that the four. It's actually quoted in Zechariah. It's
Yes.
nothing new. There are actually four kingdoms, and the white horse is actually the Parthians because they're the
Yes.
only ones who will fight with the bow. Oh
Right.
my Lord! I ruined
Yeah.
somebody's theology the other day because they asked me. I said, "Have you considered this?" And he goes, "I never heard that before."
Well, that's exactly the same problem we get with to Matthew 24 because
Yeah.
we want to put it into some prophetic future thing, when it's describing what's coming with the destruction of the temple, which is really the whole story of Revelation. And Zechariah is, I mean, it has real concrete things connected to everything that's in the book of Zechariah, but we got to make it fit in 2050.
How do we deal then? What would be a plan of action to try to? No, I think it's important for
We're
the
going to
audience
change
to
the
learn this
world right
because,
here.
I mean, right now this is regulated only to the scholarly world.
Yeah.
Well, I try to give really good. One thing that my mentor did all the way through school, and especially in the PhD program, they're trying to teach you how to teach well. And so one thing that he always did, even at the PhD level, the two required texts would be a very serious scholarly textbook, and the other would be a layman's version. And I very much appreciate this because I've been able to take, if I was to teach out of the scholarly book, even where
Oh,
I'm at a 2-year college, there's no way they would pick up on some of these things. Not because they're stupid, but because they just haven't developed to
Yeah,
that area. Takes
they're
a
not
long time to get
exposed.
there. And so I appreciate that he did that. So I'll give a couple resources that are very tangible for people to start on, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Do you
so, because I
have,
love,
do you
just like
have, are there books or articles?
so these are books, yeah, but
Okay.
they're very, very, I say, what's the word I say? They're very readable or palatable to everyone at every level of reading and understanding. So, and y'all probably have heard of some of these, but How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth.
hmm.
Gordon Fee just passed away, phenomenal scholar.
Yeah, really,
Um,
really good.
yeah,
Yeah.
how to read the Bible for all it's worth. He goes through these literary genres in a very uh, readable way. Um, and then you have Robert Alter, his two books, The Art of Biblical Narrative and The Art of Biblical Poetry. Those are phenomenal, very short reads, but very powerhouse punch. Anything by Leland Ryken, so Leland, Ryken, Ryken. Anything by him. I even have, like,
I
here on
have,
my desk at work, I've got his book right here. I reference this every day in class. So,
Wait,
I
wait,
have
wait.
his book. I
Put
have
that
his
back
book
oh,
up.
right here.
yep.
I,
So this is one. Dina's got the other one.
oh,
This
he has to. I think I have one of those.
He has multiple. This is How to
Yeah.
Read the Bible as Literature and Get More Out of It. This is good. What she has is what I tell everybody. If you just have one book, if you have limited resources, you want to understand genres and how to approach the Bible better, that's the one that Dina has. That one that
And that is literary introductions.
Yes.
Lift it
I
up a
don't have
little
the
bit more,
title.
Dina.
Oh,
Literary introductions to the books of the Bible. So it goes
yeah.
through every book of the
Yeah.
Bible, tells you every genre that's in the book. And so I tell people before you go study a book, read the
Yes.
chapter on that book in Leland Ryken's book. It is phenomenal. And
Set the
then,
table for yourself.
yeah, and then there's Leland Ryken and Tripper Longman have one similar called A Complete Literary Guide to the Bible. And then there's another series. There's only 5 books in the series. I had them here on my desk. I took them home. Tripper Longman, one of my favorite Old Testament
Yeah.
scholars, he has a How to Read series. So How to Read, and there's 5 of them: Genesis, Exodus, Psalms, Proverbs, and Job. And he goes through how to read those books properly. And they're very affordable, like $20 per book. And you can read. So I lead a group of men studying through. We did 15 months in Genesis, 24 months in Exodus, 17 months in Leviticus, and we just started Numbers. I mean, we're doing it right. But I started Genesis and Exodus with them requiring, or didn't require, but gotten most of them to read Tripper Longman's How to Read Genesis and then How to Read Exodus. Those are phenomenal books. They're short, about 150 pages. They go through literary genres, historical context, cultural context, all of those things.
So Leland Ryken has got two books. You show one of them.
He's got multiple. He's probably
Yeah,
got
read the Bible as literature, and then he has the other one, which is what?
The one
literary
I
Bible
have,
holding.
introductions
literary introductions.
to books of the Bible.
The book, yeah.
I think it's a full title.
Well,
Yeah,
I
it is.
have. It's interesting on my logos. I have dictionary of biblical imagery.
Yep.
Oh,
That's
Yeah.
great.
yeah, I've got that somewhere.
That
Somewhere.
one's really good too. But yeah, he's phenomenal. phenomenal scholar. I have another one at home that I read years ago, Words of Delight, a literary introduction to the Bibles. It's Leland Ryken, but that's his um, literary forms in the Bible. I have that one. I probably have, he's got, a couple dozen books. I've got probably 20 of them.
Now, you guys are costing me a lot of money.
Well, I think, and to the point of the importance of appreciating the Bible from its literary standpoint, will really help you get into the scriptures, I think, quicker and in a more meaningful way.
Yeah.
So we've had roadblocks and because I don't even know, we just have determined that that's really not the way to approach the Bible. Like that sounds like the secular approach to the Bible, but nothing could be further from the truth. So every piece of literature, fits in a genre and uses literary tools and devices. There's not one piece of literature out there that doesn't. So the Bible is no different. I think because we've made it a spiritual book and nothing else. So
That is true, and I'm actually recognizing that there's more to the story, and sometimes I think we're probably looking at it from a 15% understanding, and if we go deeper, quickly improve in our understanding to Scripture. That
We didn't get into wisdom literature, but when
yeah,
we misuse
next
it, it
time.
can be very, very bad. I mean, I've had people that I've dealt with, not just in my community, but all over the country, just traveling and stuff, where people, they read Proverbs, and they say, if you raise up a child in the way that they should go, they'll never depart. Well, my child is out there living like the world. How did I fail? I thought I raised them. No, that is not how it's intended to be measured. I've had people say that if you get sick, that's always a sign of punishment from God because he
yeah.
talks about curses. Those aren't promises. Wisdom literature has to be understood in its proper context.
Exactly. That's like approaching it like name it and claim it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
got you.
Yeah.
So what can we cover on this again? Is there any way we can cover another genre together? Because I was very much intrigued by this. I ordered the books, by the way,
Well,
Already.
uh,
Like
and
me,
I
I'll order
appreciate
them.
it
we
because, and I really appreciate that because I truly want to learn. So it's
so
always
we
nice
could
to.
do another episode just on wisdom literature.
Why don't we do that? I
Okay.
think I'm very much interested. If you have an article, actually, I got the books. So when I get the books, I'll read it on that and gives me an idea. But you guys are going to be the ones talking about it and bringing some examples from the Bible. And hopefully, people will start getting more interested in this type of research so that when they read it, they know, oh, this is poetry and this is this. And they can recognize it like you were doing, Matt, when you were reading certain things. I think that's kind of cool. So I want to thank both of you for teaching me and sharing what you know, and also teaching the audience. I think that if we are open enough to know that, although we study certain areas and I have certain niche that I focus, we have to complement it with a better understanding of Scripture. And I think that now, hopefully, you'll be able to understand this a little bit more when we present information that you may not really agree with me in the beginning when you hear it, but when you continue to research and look into it, you're going to start getting the broader perspective. So thank you, Dina, for being here. Appreciate it
My
very much.
pleasure.
This is our fourth class or our third?
It's our third.
So
Is it?
no, it's our
No, it's our
fourth.
fourth.
It's our
It's our
fourth,
fourth.
and we still
Yeah.
got like seven more.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, this
Matt,
one we just
any
added another one because we didn't
Yeah,
get into wisdom
maybe
yeah.
literature.
So we're
10.
gonna add another one. So we're gonna try to set it up. So thank you, Matt, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks,
for
Matt.
Really
Appreciate it.
enjoyed it, man. I really appreciate you. And to all of you on the internet, please consider joining Wisdom and Torah. And by the way, give me your website, both of you, so they can find you if they need you. Go ahead, Dina. Tell us where they can find you.
Foundationsandtorah.com, Dinah at protonmail.com.
You have a course, right? But it's
I,
closed.
right now, it'll be starting up again in September. It's the Temple Revealed course, 12 weeks. If you want to join, send me an email and I'll get
Okay.
you signed up.
Perfect. Matt?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me at and my last name Napier at gmail.com, Nappier at gmail.com. I have Lighthouse Messianic Fellowship. You can just search my name on YouTube and come to our YouTube. I was trying to think of any resources. So I have a couple of courses that I did here locally but recorded. One, the history of the Bible. It's like 15 hours. And two was how to study the Bible. And it covers a lot of this type of stuff. So, and I think it's about 15 hours as well. So.
Awesome. Pretty cool. So if you are watching this on wisdomandtorah.com, we have that podcast. We have all the teachings. Please subscribe, hit the little bell there, and share with others so we can get more people to tune in how to study the Bible correctly, understanding literary genres, and grow. Let us grow into the understanding of the scriptures. Instead of fighting with each other all the time about who's right and wrong, we're going to recognize quickly that we all need help understanding many things. But once we do and we talk amongst each other, we'll be better servants of God. May the Lord bless you and keep you guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.